Speedrunning Celeste is as much of a journey as the game itself, and it's a long journey, filled with interesting tech, difficult inputs, and weird strategies. And after hugely improving on my PB, all greens! I took a break from the game for a while. But I couldn't stay away for too long, because I was rapidly approaching a landmark on my journey, a barrier most players never pass. I was close to the sub 40 barrier. Getting beyond it is more difficult than any barrier before it. It requires skill, motivation, and planning. And so, one night, I began working. This is how I beat Celeste's 40-minute barrier. But first, I wanted to look at where I was at before I tried to move forward. My current PB was a 43:12. The run obviously has its flaws, but for my skill level it was relatively clean. However, my skill level was the issue, because what I refer to as my skill level is actually just the strategies that I use to beat each level. And because this was a clean run, continuing to practice the strategies that I'm already using won't make me any faster. No. To improve my time, I would need to use faster strategies. And while the best idea is technically to copy the strategies the world record uses, those are way harder than what I'm ready for, and I don't exactly have the time to relearn the whole run. So instead, I looked over my PB and tried to find the areas where I had the most room to improve. And I found two really weak spots in the run, chapters 5 and 6. Chapter 5, which I'm going to call Temple for brevity, had especially been bothering me for a while. See, my strategies for this level were a mess, because I decided that in my runs, doing the harder strategy 5B would be funnier. I spent, on average, 7 minutes on this level because I was doing 5B. Out of curiosity as to how much time I was losing, I did a single run of the easier strat, 5A, with no preparations. It was 6 minutes, a minute faster than my average 5B time. As soon as I saw this, I kind of realized that I should absolutely switch back to 5A. Sure, I'd technically lose a little time to using a slower strategy, but it would be way more consistent. Eventually, I'll have to switch back to 5B because it is faster, but at this point, the cons of 5B were more relevant than the pros. So, I committed to relearning every single room from the ground up. This might seem excessive, but above every other stage in the game, you need to have your strategy planned out in advance for Chapter 5, for two reasons. Seekers and cycles. These chaotic mini-eldritch horrors will end up in dramatically different situations based on the slightest variation in your movement. For a speedrun, you want to be able to predict what they're going to do and where they're going to be, so you absolutely need a strategy to deal with every single one of them. And for cycles, they're applicable in a lot of stages, and all it means is that you need to know where moving things are going to be when you get to them so that you don't hit them. I'm not going to go over every single strategy I use to improve, but I'd recommend this tutorial by Programmatic for learning the A side. It's a little outdated, and there might be something better out there, but if you want the maximum optimization, you won't be doing the A side anyways. Anyway, I learned the new strats to deal with the Seekers, and after a significant amount of practice, I eventually brought my average time below 6 minutes, and the maximum potential was down to 5 minutes on especially good runs. So now I should be saving a minute or more over my PB on almost every run, making matching that PB and even beating it much easier. To prove this, I started upstream. Gambling, my beloved. But after 2 days and 4 separate runs, the best I got was 3 minutes away. It felt like I wasn't on my game. It seemed like I was missing something. But then I did one offline attempt and beat my PB by the full minute that Chapter 5 saved now. And then I did another run and PB'd again. Clearly, I just needed to get warmed back up. But like I said earlier, even though I'm faster now, instead of repeatedly grinding out the strategies that I was already using, I would need to optimize my run further. And that brings me to the second thing that stood out as good to optimize. Chapter 6 is a pretty long level, the second longest in any percent behind Summit. It took me 8 minutes at least to clear the chapter, and usually closer to 9. And this was fine when I was going for mid-40 times, but I decided it was about time that I optimized this stage a little. The good thing about Reflection is that the optimizations are generally pretty straightforward. There's two things you have to do in this level that are really slow. First, using feathers, which move at a set speed, meaning you can't speed them up, and they're necessary for most of the rooms they're in, meaning you can't skip them. Second, the battle-in fight, which cancels out your momentum every time you hit battle-in. And since there's a lot of time where you're stuck doing these slower sections, the more movement-heavy sections are fewer, and I found them easier to learn this way. But there is still room to optimize the slower stuff. The most we can do to optimize the feathers is taking tighter corners, getting out of them as quickly as possible, and trying to link them together, since there's an animation that doesn't play if you never leave the feather. There's a little more we can do with battling though. Basically, if you dash as soon as you can after you hit her, there's a lot of optimizations that save a few seconds. And when you're saving a second or two every time you need to hit her, those seconds add up over to like 54 times you have to hit her. So most of the optimizations for this level are to take a certain route with the feather, and to dash a certain direction after you hit battle in, and one last big thing in these big Kevin boosts, where you hyper off of a Kevin to get a shit ton of speed. There's a few places you can do this, and they each save a few seconds. So, again, I took a ton of time to practice these new strats, trying to get them all down perfectly so that I wouldn't have to worry about executing them in a run, and then I got back to any percent. But once again, run after run, I always choked somehow, and my time didn't get any lower. I was saving the time in reflection, but I just kept losing it elsewhere. But learning from what happened with my current PB, I kept pushing, because eventually I had to have a good run. And after a few more days of attempts, I eventually got a small PB. I was definitely in range to get a sub 40 now, but I was struggling with random bits of huge time loss in all of my runs. Getting sub 40 would require me not to have these huge time losses. To avoid these time losses, I would have to focus incredibly hard on the run, not letting my thoughts or attention deviate for even a second. And if I wanted to save time without having to have that kind of focus, I'd have to go relearn even more levels to have more chances to save time. But then I had a better idea. The issue with getting sub 40 was that there couldn't be any major time losses. But that begs the question, where have I been losing so much time? Analyzing my runs, there was 4 rooms in which I would consistently lose time. This room, because the route that I use for it is a little more difficult than most of the strategies that I use. This room because of the snowballs. This room because the timing is a little weird. And this room because I get nervous at the end of runs. These 4 rooms are the weaknesses in my runs. Even if I go and optimize other sections of the run, these rooms will still be losing time. So, once I'd gotten a PB with my new reflection, I went back to these rooms to rework my strategies and make them more consistent. Dealing with the snowballs was just a matter of better routing, so I put together a route for the room that I could consistently perform. The secret room is difficult because the timing is very specific, but that was fixed by just practicing the room to develop more muscle memory for the timing. And the same thing applies for this room, where it's just some specific timing that I have to relearn. The last room, however, is stressful. At the end of a good run, you need to perform well, and that can be difficult when you know you're on good pace. I did go through and practice the section a few times, making sure I knew exactly what inputs were necessary, but the stress at the end of a good run was still an issue. So I came up with 2 things, not in-game solutions, but real-world ones, which would, in theory, help me not only at the end of the run, but throughout it. 1. Stop looking at my timer. As long as a run isn't horrible, it's a better idea to not bother looking at the timer, because the more time I spend focusing on the timer, the less time I spend focusing on the run. 2. Stop drinking caffeine. This was mostly to test whether it would make me perform better by reducing anxiety, or perform worse because I wasn't as focused. So now, my biggest issue wasn't my strategies. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough anymore, it was just that I hadn't done enough attempts yet. So it was time to stop planning and start doing. But not before I randomly took like a 5-day break from the game, because, fun fact, adjusting to not having caffeine in your system can sometimes lead to headaches for a few days. But once the headache was gone, it was time to try some runs again. Like I said, I was testing to see how not drinking caffeine would affect my performance, and at the start of the stream, it seemed like my performance was going to be worse. But then, I somehow went from a minute behind to 20 seconds ahead. This would have been very close to sub 40 if the first few stages weren't awful, and the next 2 runs were also 41 minutes, minus the horrific start. And these were just my first attempts. I was only going to get better from here. It was time to do this. Yes! Fuck yeah! 39:14. I'd done it. I beat the 40-minute barrier, and I kinda crushed it. But this journey isn't over yet, because I am so far from satisfied with this. This small landmark has made me realize how much better I can get at this game. My sum of best, the combination of my best times on each level, is now at 37 minutes, which means there's a ton of time that I could save with just a cleaner run. And beyond that, I still have a long way to go for my strategies on some of the levels. I've barely scratched the surface on optimizing my resort and ridge, and there's still a ton of time I can be saving on summit. Yes, I'm victorious today, but in speedrunning, this peak will end up just being average in the future. YouTube stuff if you want to see the future of this journey, follow my Twitch if you want to watch it live.